One of my favorite pastimes over the last decade and change has been reading what people say about me on the internet. I know it's not necessarily good for your mental health to do things like this, but who needs mental health? So, I have been watching what people say about me for a really long time, and there's this opinion I see coming up a lot lately that I have majorly changed my politics over time. And I see this mostly from people who already didn't really seem to understand what I was saying in the first place, who probably thought I was like more on their side politically at some point and then gradually realized, oh, that wasn't the case. But I've also seen it from people who are on my own side of the political, like people who think that they agree with me more now than they used to. Y'all are both categories equally hilarious to me, just utterly hilarious. Because from my perspective, my politics have almost not changed at all. How I present politics has changed dramatically. So I understand where the problem comes from. I totally get it. But it's really funny to me because, well, I'll break down how this happened. And first of all, we have to get into like, well, what were my politics? What are my politics? What have my politics been? So the environment I grew up in was very political, mostly because of my mom. Because my mom is a very politically interested person. And a lot of that is less to do with that she was like politically involved and more that she listens to a lot of political music. That my mom has always been big into music, and a lot of the music she likes is political. In particular, I grew up hearing System of a Down relentlessly, religiously from my mom. But something I didn't really understand back then as a kid is that my mom didn't really care that much about the lyrics. Like she resonates with them sometimes, but that wasn't her core engagement, you know. I have always analyzed lyrics. It's always been a part of just my natural engagement with music. I'm interested in what the words mean. So I have always been thinking about these System of a Down lyrics and trying to parse, you know, what they're saying politically, but sometimes they were very direct. You know, a song like Prison Song that just straight up breaks down why the American prison system is broken, it's a compelling argument. So before I knew anything else about American prisons, I knew all the ways that they are broken because of, you know, listening to System of a Down and then investigating the stuff they're talking about. I also grew up with the internet. I grew up with search engines, you know, so I've always had access to more information. And usually what you learn, you know, when you're learning the truth is that people in power, they have every incentive to keep you away from the truth. And in fact, doing that is usually how they got powerful and how they're maintaining power. So as soon as you become at all politically knowledgeable, you realize that your existence in politics can either be that you help the power structure to maintain itself, or you try to fight the power. Row, row, fight the power, right? Those are the real two political sides. It's not left versus right. Those are both on the same side. The people who call themselves Democrats and Republicans, they built a system to keep themselves in power. The power of Republicans and the power of Democrats do not challenge one another's existence. They just challenge who has more power at a given moment, but the system is built literally to pendulum between the two of them. Now, what they say they want, what they do to maintain power, they get those ideas from the disenfranchised, from the people trying to fight the power. They give you tools to pretend that you are being effective against them. Basically, they create a playground of ideas that matter to you, that you can vote on, and you can pick one side or the other. But voting pro or anti-abortion doesn't destabilize the people who are making the decision for you. You personally should be able to make whatever decision you want. It should be up to you. Are you pro-abortion? Are you anti-abortion? But as soon as you decide that you are your brother's keeper, you are now part of the uphold the power structure. You are now part of, oh, well, I would never get an abortion, but also it shouldn't be legal because you shouldn't be allowed to have one. That is not a left-leaning political idea. That is an anti-establishment political idea. But it will be painted to you as a left versus right issue. It's not. It's a power versus disempowerment issue. So in this sense, it sounds like I'm saying I'm a libertarian because I'm saying that I'm on the anti-establishment side, or even an anarchist. And that's kind of true, but only theoretically, because we're talking about political idealism. And political reality and political idealism are two fucking completely different subjects. This is where shit gets so confusing for people. People think that I am a hardcore libertarian because I mostly, throughout history, talked about political idealism. Ideally, you don't need politics. Ideally, you don't need government. You just know who your neighbors are and you trust each other. That's idealism. But reality is I don't know who my neighbors are. And so, yeah, I do want there to be certain rules about what they think they're allowed to do. And even if I've never engaged with them personally, I feel a certain comfort in knowing that there is a top-down structure that has brainwashed them. I know they're under as much brainwashing as I am not to do violence against one another. Like, that is government. That is what the point is. The point of authority is to create in as many people as possible the same ideas about what's correct. Back in like 2013, I used to joke that my politics were Aberdolf Linkler politics. It's a character from Rick and Morty. The joke was that from an idealistic perspective, I want there to be no rules and perfect freedom. From a what is effective standpoint, like absolute authority is effective. What the rich people are trying to do right now is essentially decrease the population to a manageable size. If you are considered an unmanageable person or type of person, they don't want you. They want a manageable populace. Because when people are manageable, then whether or not it's really to their own benefit that they are allowing themselves to be managed, it is a lot easier for one person to get what they want if they're in control of the system. You know, like it might be a lot harder for everyone to get what they want, but if you've been brainwashed from the beginning to want a certain thing and you don't break that conditioning your whole life, then you are just perfectly content to be in servitude to someone else's needs. This is obviously observable in the society we're in, you know? But like when you look at America right now, you see that broadly, most people are comfortable enough with the system that they are not actively fighting it. There are people actively fighting the system, and the system is trying to suppress them because that's how you maintain power. Again, if you want an organized system, the easiest way to achieve that is authoritarianism. But if your belief is that you will never achieve the system you really want until everyone is free, then you have to also be working towards that end. And that's just a more difficult path. It's a path of more resistance. So I have always encouraged taking the path of more resistance because I believe it is righteous. And I believe that you feel better as a person living that way, especially when you have the knowledge. The reason they say ignorance is bliss is that when you are subjugated, you don't have ideations of freedom. When you have understood freedom, when you've tasted freedom, you ideate it forever. If you want a grounded example, we have a big cat here in the house, and Big Cat's not allowed to go outside. But every once in a while, my husband will put him on his shoulder and walk him around the backyard for a few minutes. Every time we're anywhere near the back door, he comes meowing to be taken outside. He wants to go out there. He wants to go out there by himself. He wants to get down off of my husband's, but we won't let him. And the reason for that is he's an asthmatic cat with AIDS. He is a house cat who grew up in a shelter. He's not prepared for the outside world. And it's not that he would definitely die, but it's so much easier to imagine him running into issues than it is to imagine him having a good time out there. It would be different if he was a different cat, but he doesn't know that. He has no perspective onto what he's like. He is completely under an authoritarian regime. Absolutely. His food is controlled. He spends probably 2 hours begging for food before it disperses from a machine that is set on a timer that we do not control. But again, when you've tasted freedom, you will ideate it forever. And so you can kind of block out the part of your mind that ideates freedom and literally shave yourself down to fit into something. But you're not gonna, it's not healthy. It's not good for you, except in that you survive. But every human has had to ask themselves, like, is survival better than, freedom? Like, is it worth living longer if the circumstances are what they are? And sometimes the best case scenario you've got is so shit that you're like, I will literally throw my life away if it means it might, either I'm going to get rich or die trying, as 50 Cent would say. And rich doesn't even mean rich. It means better circumstances than I have. Everyone's idea of rich is totally different. I promise your idea of rich is not rich unless you mean billionaire, and even then you got to consider that, like, the 2000th richest billionaire does not feel rich because he's not in the top 20. I promise this is how psychology works. So, having all of that in mind, I was not actively political until recently because I viewed politics as a discussion topic more so than like an active part of my existence. And part of that is because I didn't really view myself as a person until my 30s, until I started transition, because I just didn't know, how do I fit into this thing? Like, I see all of this happening and I see all these people caring about their unique circumstances, and I feel like what's going on with me is a million miles away from all of that. I've always been mostly advocating mental health. Like, if there's one thing that I've been a big proponent of since I was a teenager, it's everybody needs a counselor. Everybody needs way more knowledge on psychology, way more knowledge on sociology, because the core of this whole society thing is communication. It's people talking to each other. And if you can't figure out how to communicate effectively, then it just creates chaos. And that's exactly what I ended up doing through not knowing how to communicate about politics effectively. I created a chaotic idea of what my politics are because, again, I wasn't viewing it as something that I'm like doing because I have a personal cause. I was just saying, like, hey, you're all talking about this and I'm hearing what you're all saying, so let me tell you what you are saying to one another. I love translating. I love being a go-between. I love telling one person what they're not getting about what the other person is saying, So I had to figure out what the fuck the right-wing people are talking about. And I had not really regarded conservative people as people, like, at all until my 20s. The way that my parents talked about, particularly my mom, the way she talked about Christian conservatives was like To be a Christian or a conservative just innately means you must be the dumbest person in the world. You know, like she talks about all of them just as a blanket, like they are the dumbest people in the world. So growing up, and this is very much like how a lot of liberals are. Liberals oh God, especially in California. Like I've met legitimately intelligent, worldly, liberal people who nonetheless have this very incorrect belief that all Christians and conservatives are stupid. The reason that's such a stupid thing to think is that you're not accounting for liars. And you're not accounting for lying to yourself or simply believing things you know aren't true. Because, what's the word I'm looking for? Cognitive dissonance. You're not accounting for cognitive dissonance. You can very much be an incredibly intelligent person and still, because you have been brainwashed by a cult since birth, you believe some shit that's not true. So, like, there was a moment when I realized I had to start listening to right-wing people and understanding what the fuck is going on with them. And it was when Donald Trump became president. Because I thought it was impossible. I literally was like laughing at how dumb the Republican Party was for running him. I thought it was like a desperation move that was hopeless. Hillary was a name I was born in like right before Bill Clinton became president, you know? So like my whole childhood, Bill Clinton was president. So I never heard anything negative about the president during Bill's term other than he got a blowjob, and I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. I was too young. I learned about it later, you know? So during Bill's presidency, I had never heard anything negative about the president. I had then spent 8 years under Bush where I heard nothing but complaints about the president, particularly after he started a bunch of wars. And being political in the 2000s meant you were either pro-war or anti-war, and either pro-gay or anti-gay. Those are the only two political things that mattered in the 2000s. War and gay marriage. That's all we were talking about. I had never heard the word transgender until the 2010s. So this is what left versus right meant to me as a kid. You were a Democrat if you were anti-war and pro-gay. You were a Republican if you were pro-war and anti-gay. None of that's true. I didn't know that. I didn't know Hillary was as much a warmonger as anyone. I didn't learn anything about what she was doing during Obama's presidency. When Obama was president, I was like, holy fuck, America's great. We got a cool guy, cool black president. I'm fucking happy about it. I thought 8 years of awesome. Nothing to complain about. He even killed bin Laden. That was just for the right. In my mind, I was like, oh shit, yeah, he gave one to them too. What a fucking nice guy. He gave them bin Laden just so they would feel better about having had a black president for 8 years. That's what I thought. So, when the 2016 election happened, I wasn't campaigning. Now, here's the thing. Bernie Sanders would have been my pick. And my mom was actually involved in Bernie's campaign. She actually had meetings for the Bernie Sanders campaign at our house. She was making cakes for Bernie, hardcore Bernie support. But then Bernie backed out. And when Bernie backed out, I lost interest in voting because I lost faith in the Democratic Party because Bernie seemed way more popular and like he would have won. But he was a threat to established power. In the same way that the Republicans were kind of taking a gamble by throwing Trump up there, it would have been a similar type of a gamble to throw Bernie up there. But in my mind, I think he would have won. I think people really hated Hillary. And I didn't understand how much they hated her until, we were getting towards the end and it was getting really brutal. And it was really like, the right would never vote for her. They will never. There are some right-wing people who might have voted for Bernie. The right would never vote for Hillary. So in the same way that the left would never vote for Trump, or so they thought, not accounting for that there's really young people who are just becoming able to vote who, see this all as a political circus in a game, and they voted for the funniest guy. I understand that. In retrospect, I didn't at the time. I was so confused. I thought it must be voter fraud. I was like, they stole the election. It's fucked. But there was one person who had been satirizing Trump voters the whole election cycle, who I had been listening to, called Dick Masterson. Now, if you don't understand what was actually happening in 2016, Dick Masterson and a guy called Maddox had a podcast called The Biggest Problem in the Universe. They were playing characters on this podcast against each other, but the podcast kind of fell apart when it became apparent that Maddox's character is just who he is and he doesn't know how to turn it off. And Dick, because he's different from that, confused Maddox so badly he couldn't tell what was real and what was not about Dick. Dick has always been a satirist. It's what he does. He does satire. His first book, or his only book, is called Men Are Better Than Women. If you read the book, it's fucking hilarious. It's making fun of men. It's making fun of chauvinism. It's not making fun of women. If you read it and you think it's making fun of women, you are stupid. Outright. You'd have to be dumb. So, this cartoon parody of a misogynist who got himself onto Dr. Phil playing this character, trolled Dr. Phil to the point that he couldn't be taken seriously anymore as an institution. A hero of the internet, this Dick Masterson guy. During Biggest Problem, he was playing the Trump voter because Maddox wasn't. And this is antithetical to Maddox's character. Maddox's character is supposed to be a chauvinistic, misogynistic, kind of hyper-masculine character. But Maddox, who is from Utah, has lived in LA for a long time, and in order to impress women has started trying to be really liberal. And it bled into his character, and so he starts becoming somehow the liberal anti-Trump guy on the podcast. So this puts Dick in the position of, I'm going to double, triple, quadruple down everything Trump says. I'm going to say the even more extreme version of it. It's a funny bit, especially because Maddox is constantly confused about why, is it a bit? Before the election, the day before the election, Dick said, if Trump loses, obviously it was always a bit. If Trump wins, I'm going to throw a huge celebration, And part of this was also because in Dick's book, it actually says, if a woman ever becomes president, I will eat this book. So he was really afraid of having to eat his book. And that was also part of this. Again, I'm not saying that Dick Masterson is an amazing person that more people need to be like, per se. I do think we need a lot more of this energy, a lot more satire energy, deconstruction of narratives, because people are so not used to it that they can't even wrap their head around it. And I've been talking about this dude and what he's been doing for over a decade. And still, when people talk about why they think that I'm a libertarian or they think I'm right-wing, they talk about my associations with Dick Masterson. And I'm like, you mean the satirist with no political opinions? What are you the guy who just says the worst thing all the time? And that's the bit? If you can't tell it's a bit, that's on you. You're either not paying attention or you just don't find this kind of humor funny, and that's fine, but you can't deny that it's humor. You can't deny that it's satire just because you don't like the satire. So, being that I am a part of this world of these satirists, I have that part of my own identity, where I am also a troll, I am also a satirist. But I also have a reputation as an analyst and a vlogger, and for talking about my real life and my real personal opinions online. This is a light edit because I feel like I skipped a beat in this story. I was talking about that Dick Masterson is a satirist who was not really pro-Trump, but was kind of playing the character of what somebody who is pro-Trump is going to say. And at the same time, I, started finding out about like the people he's, getting his info from, and like trying to listen to who I consider to be intelligent people that are on the right wing. And it's not that I agree with them or that I think that they were correct in the things they're saying, as much as that like there is logic. Like it's not people being stupid. They think they're being smart. They think they're making the more intelligent choice. And oftentimes it's way less to do with that they really agree with their own side as much as that they super disagree with the other side. It's usually that most of the people who are intelligent and vote Republican just like have a seething hatred of Democrats, which is often understandable. Doesn't mean that I think that they should be voting for the people they're voting for, but I get where the anger comes from. And that was something I did not know beforehand. Again, I grew up just basically thinking smart people are Democrats, dumb people are Republicans. That's not true. And thinking that is a dumb thing to think. And I think really why I have a reputation for like oversharing is because of my old like Let's Play series, where it was like me and my brother would play video games, and we would just tell like every conceivable life story that we could come up with just to fill time for content. It's just like, what can I think of that happened to me that makes a good story? I'm going to tell it on this show, And then I also did a radio show called The Pub Crawl. And The Pub Crawl was me and a drunken Australian person just basically looking for every combination of words in existence and saying them, So, like, the experimental side of what I do, I think, has always kind of conflicted with the more accessible side of what I do. And it's really just the only reason these two things both exist is that the experimental side is who I am and what I like to do, and it doesn't make me any money. And the accessible side is I have to make money, doing this. So to me, there was always an obvious division of like, and originally it was kind of two different channels. There was the main channel that was almost always like a straightforward, analytical, there's some personal stuff in it, but that's not the focus. It's really about a piece of media, And then on this other side channel, you had the quirky experimental persona. And it's not that I was like being dishonest. It's just that I didn't know how to present myself honestly in a straightforward way. So I incorporated all these experimental things like satire, personas, talking through comments, responses, and like really just every video had its own mentality, like on the After Dark channel, there was always like an individual approach to each subject that wasn't going to necessarily be the same as the last video. And I've kind of kept that spirit alive because that became the more fun way to make content, and it was the content people responded to more directly, in that when I would make, like, let's say an anime video that gets, 1 million views, a lot of those views are just people who care about that anime, who don't really engage with the video or with me. They're not likely to become patrons or whatever. But when 10,000 people would see an After Dark rant, then a lot more of them were going to comment, a lot more would subscribe, a lot more would become patrons. So I became more focused on this more esoteric, experimental part of my content. But at some point it got just too esoteric and experimental and just lost everyone, at some point I got to a depth of satire and experiment and where people go, I can't tell what's real and what's fake anymore. And I guess for me, my mentality was like, well, the reality is always the same. Like, reality doesn't change. Reality's been reality. It's always going to be reality. Reality is we're all sitting at our computers or at our phones somewhere. Like, if I'm online, reality is this. If I'm online, reality is this. That's all it is. There is nothing more happening. You know, like, if I made a video, I did what was in the video, and I did, you know, uploading it. And, like, so, like, to me, unless I'm literally documenting every single thing I do, which is mostly not interesting, you're never going to really know exactly what I'm doing, but it should be obvious. And so in the content, there should always be room to experiment and to pull things apart and to really make something interesting or different. But because of the fact that people have this expectation that, like, I'm going to be honest or I'm going to tell you about myself, they are reading into it like, oh, well, how does this reflect the reality, or how the real situation has changed? And it's like, well, the real situation never changes. It's always a bunch of people in houses on computers or on their phones, or going to the fucking Dairy Queen and you're on your phone. Like, reality doesn't change. Every once in a while, technology makes us interface with reality a little bit differently, you know? So when it comes to the politics, like, my position has always stayed that, like, idealistically, we don't need a government. We just know who our neighbors are. We get along. We're tribalist. You know, there's a band called Dredge that has this concept they sing about a lot of, like, we live like penguins in the desert. Why don't we live like tribes? You know, all you need is a modest house in a modest neighborhood where honest people dwell, making cleanest energy for the greenest plants to grow, richest soil that's drenched with the freshest rain. You should sit in your backyard and watch clouds peek over the tallest mountaintops. I've believed that since hearing that when I was 16. That's my philosophy, you know. Zen Buddhism I've studied since I was a teenager. You know, I believe completely in Taoism. I believe completely in the spirit that moves through all things. You know, I believe science has failed our Mother Earth, as System of a Down said. I have an extremely, you know, interconnected spiritual kind of outlook on humanity. I do think we're all one, not just humanity, on the world, on the universe, you know, like, it's the same particles moving through everything. Like, again, the first principle of matter is that, you know, it can't be created or destroyed. Like, it's unchangeable. Reality is what it is. How you feel about it, how you interface with it, what you do with it changes. And I want everybody to do what is best for them without affecting others negatively. That is my ideal system. That is what the government is meant to do, theoretically, is to make it so that there is a equal playing field for everybody to get what they want without hurting someone else's ability to get what they want, unless that person is hurting someone. You know, like, if what you want is put this person away because they're hurting somebody else, the government exists to facilitate that. So in a perfect system, nobody would ever start subjugating anyone else because they would have learned empathy from the beginning. And you're more likely to be empathetic towards people who were there for you directly than you are towards a system teaching you empathy. You know, trickle down empathy is not as good as pump up empathy as it happens. So when I talk about politics, I'm not talking about idealism anymore. That was what I used to do. And that made people think, oh, I'm like a big libertarian. Well, I guess idealistically you could call it libertarianism, but my ideal libertarianism is one where you are raising people from the beginning with empathy. It's another form of brainwashing. You know, teaching someone that they have enemies that need to be destroyed is the same thing, you know, it's the same level of brainwashing as teaching them that they must love everyone, you know? So I don't think it's possible to not, on some level, end up brainwashing people, end up with authoritarianism. Words are authoritarian, literally. Authoritarian. That is the point. You are authorizing. You are giving authorization. To authorize means to create reality, to write through words. Literally, it has to be words, obviously, but to use words to shape reality is to authorize. Authority is what I'm doing right now. I am expressing authority, and I am shaping your reality through my authority. I am the authority on myself, and so I'm talking about myself. People love saying those words, I'm the authority on myself. Not really, but people accept when you talk about yourself. That's why I talk about myself so much. Because if I talk about something else, someone can offer a disagreement about it. But if I make it about me, how are you going to tell me who I am? And the number one way people fight with me or get into arguments with me is when they can't accept that I am who I'm saying that I am. They either think I'm lying or they think I'm delusional. And so, I can deal with that. I could always deal with people thinking I'm lying or delusional, because guess what? I am lying and delusional. And that's one of the hardest things to notice about yourself. It's one of the hardest things for people to notice about themselves, is when they are lying and when they are being delusional. And so I like having these things pointed out to me, even if it's often inaccurate. Oftentimes people think I'm lying when I'm not, or think I'm being delusional when I think I am at my most realistic. And I often see people themselves lying about me or being delusional about me, which is hilarious. So that's why I engage with, people talking about me online, because, again, at least in my mind, I'm the authority on myself. So if I see someone whose authority is non-existent trying to have authority over my narrative, it's really funny. It can make me really mad sometimes. But for the most part, these people don't succeed. They're not able to convert or convince other people. So I just kind of watch them live in their own little world. And sometimes I try to pull them out of it, but sometimes I just look at it like, well, I don't need you to know the truth. If I don't need someone, if I think someone seems insufferable and they're out there lying about me, I'm not going to sit there and be like, hey, let me work with you to bring you over to I don't care. They can just be out there doing that. And chances are nobody else listens to them, because they're probably lying about everybody they know or everybody they talk about. So, there's a level where you become trusted towards certain things. People trust that I am being somewhat honest about myself, at least, because the stories line up. I tell so many stories, and so many of them are corroborated by other people or just add up, realistically speaking, that they think, okay, well, you generally tell true stories about yourself. The main way that I tend to conceal things is just simply by omission. I just don't talk about most things, So I give this illusion of, I'm talking about everything that happens all the time because I make so much content, but I'm really good at taking a little bit and making a lot out of it. I can take a 10-minute thing that happened to me and make it sound like you just heard my whole day, and it could be the least interesting thing that happened that day, but it's the one that makes a good story. So there's a level of lying and obfuscation and manipulation to make you think that I am a certain person or that I am doing a certain thing. But at the end of the day, the reality. The reality is I'm sitting in a chair typing. The reality is I'm in a bathroom ranting at a camera. I'm going to end the clip. I'm going to take it to my computer. I'm going to upload it onto my computer. I'm going to take a clip of me shouting out all my sponsors. I'm going to open DaVinci Resolve, put those two things together. It's going to become a full video. It's going to get uploaded, members only. And then I'm going to probably either play video games or start watching. I'll probably just watch a bunch of other YouTube videos and keep looking for inspiration towards my next rant topic. So that's reality. Everything past that is a reality marble. It's a thing we're doing together. It's a shared experience. Whatever the words I say cause your brain to do that isn't sit in a bathroom or, type on a computer, that's all extra. That's all just in your head. That's all, that's politics. That's what this conception thing that we're doing together. There is nothing literally preventing my neighbor from coming over and murdering me, other than that a hyperstructure has been built around making that unideal, like making that unappealing, making that something they just wouldn't want to do or would even think to do, So, like, when we're talking about politics, what we're really talking about is a meta-narrative, an unreality. And that's why idealism gets so worked into it, because you do want to be working towards idealism. But at the same time, the reality of some people's lives is shitty. And like, that's what politics is really about addressing. It's really like, well, how do we fix things for the people for whom things are shitty right now? And everybody thinks that their situation could be better. And so they're all working towards, well, how do I make my situation better? And then I'll be able to help out, people who I think need help. But to some, the people that they think need help is like their rich friends, because poor people aren't really people, and then to some, it's like, well, I need to, help people who have no ability to help themselves, and to spite these people who could be helping them but aren't. And like, that's again where you start getting into the identity stuff, where you start getting into the, like, well, who am I because of what I'm doing? Like, how does my action define my identity politically or whatever? And like, I think if you are thinking of yourselves in those terms, you've already lost. Like, as soon as you start thinking like, I do this, therefore I am a Democrat, or I do this and that makes me leftist, or that makes me libertarian, or that makes me authoritarian, it doesn't matter. That part isn't real. That part is a feeling, or it's a part of a conversation. It's a part of a discussion. It's a part of how you think. It is not a part of what you're doing. Helping a homeless person doesn't make you more leftist. It just means you're helping a homeless person. In the big meta conversational fuckery of the mind, people can call that whatever they want, but it's not that. It's you doing a thing. So when I talk about have my politics changed, nothing I've done has changed. Nothing I'm doing has changed. I'm still doing the same shit. So the biggest difference to me is, like, I used to be really scared of guns and anti-gun. I was like, we need, way more regulations. Why do regular people even need guns? Now I'm like, everybody should know how to use a gun. Everybody should have a gun, but they should all have been taught how to use a gun. Like, to me, idealistically, if we're going to have an authoritarian system that is purportedly for good, to make good happen, it should raise everybody to understand psychology. It should raise everybody to understand everything. You should understand technology. Firearms are technology. You should understand all technology. You should understand how to build a house. You should understand, how the world works. Like, we just don't even fucking teach people the stuff they would need to know to operate in authoritarian society. Because an idealistic authoritarian society is not top down, it's everyone. Everyone would have equal authority over shaping reality. It's still authoritarian. You can have an authoritarianism of absolute equality among humans as long as it's still humans making all the decisions, which it's gonna be. It's not gonna be cows. So I would say that I am politically extremely authoritarian, because that's what politics is. It's to have any political opinion is to be extremely authoritarian. But idealistically, I don't think anybody should be speaking ever. What is there to talk about if you're satisfied? You see how ridiculous it sounds to, like, say that you're an authoritarian or a libertarian or a liberal or conservative? Just have perspective. That's it. Just have perspective. Not a perspective. All of it. Have all the perspective you can find. That's what I'm trying to give you. I'm not trying to make you a leftist, because what that means will be a totally different thing 10 years from now. I'm trying to make you have as much perspective as possible. I'm trying to have as much perspective as possible. And like I said, one of the hardest things to get perspective on is how you look from the outside. And that's why that's the thing that I come to the internet for more than anything. I can go look at everything other than me, but I can't see myself the way you see me. So I love reading the comments, even when they're negative, even when they're goofy, even when they're totally wrong, because I want to know, how do you think things are? And that's more important to me than you being right or wrong. I just want to know. All right, shouts out. I think I'm going to release this as my first members only video of 2026. I have a bunch of them filmed that I want to release them at the right time. Like, I want each one to come out at a time when it makes sense. Last year I was kind of just recording stuff and then publishing it instantly, and it kind of just looks like a mess, you know, looking over my channel. I don't think it's easy for people to like follow a narrative or anything like that. So I want it to be a little bit easier for these to flow, and for, you know, people to see a new members only video and be curious about signing up for a membership, or, you know, also have there be content that's not members only to even, you know, bring people to the channel at all. You know, hopefully you enjoy it just as much, whether it's members only or not. But, you know, all of it is only possible because of the members. Like, whether or not the video is members only, it is still only possible because you are all supporting me. It's the only, if I wasn't making as much money through memberships as I am, I would have retired this channel again. So shouts out to Goio _ Manuel Rodriguez, Septimus, Gore of a Dream, Mild Monster, Discount, Josh Powling, Ranilla, Goku the Black, Mayday from Space, Time Fades Away, Theodore Tybalt, Thema Luna, Saffron, Internet Weirdo, Andrea, Saxy42, Never Knows Best, Guyo B, The Last Scoot, Dalton Dedianus, Queer Codehead, Isabel Incorporated, Theo L, Vuzel, Heian Kyo, Brody, Ballast, Dr. Hades, Arthur Washington, Big Water Fan, Luna Lulu, Crystalline Fos, Zydeas, Zinc, Radio Knights, Brianna W, Baba Gadusius, Pika Pika 2000, Kuderehime, Spectral, Oh My Guy, Commenter number 456, Spacey Filmer, Your Stuff Is Cool, CC, Plague on Humanity, Denakori, Z-Cypher, Gary Always, Gigadonk, Zerakiel, Zen Huxtable, Duncan264, Gassy Hall, Taperclip, and Night Night. Y'all, 58. That's beautiful. Let's keep it going. Tell everybody you know. It's time to finally get on the Trixie train. All right. Forever,